Welcome back to Bible Shorts, episode 96. No room at the inn? Well, in today's episode, we're going to catch up with Joseph and Mary and investigate the paragraph in Luke's Gospel, chapter 2, that describes the birth of Jesus. It's just a few sentences. And you're thinking, what's there to investigate? We know what happened. Or do we? Let's examine the evidence. And the first thing we need to remember is that the book of Luke was written in Greek, and that all of our Bibles we read today are translations from Greek into whatever language we are reading. Now, I have multiple Bibles, but let's look at what my New International Version, published in 2005, says. Luke chapter 2, starting at verse 4. So Joseph also went out from the town of Nazareth in Galilee to Judea, to Bethlehem, the town of David, because he belonged to the house and line of David. He went there to register with Mary, who was pledged to be married to him and was expecting a child. While they were there, the time came for the baby to be born, and she gave birth to her firstborn, a son. She wrapped him in cloths and placed him in a... what? Well, yes, she placed him in a manger, because there was no room for them in the... where? Well, in the inn. Everybody knows that, right? Well, maybe not. Our story begins with a man called Francisco Sanchez de las Brosas, born over 500 years ago in Spain. He was a professor at the University of Salamanca, where he was a philologist. That means he studied and taught about the history of languages. And he noticed something odd about a word in Luke 2:7, a word translated as in our English Bible. Now, his Bible wouldn't have been in English. It was probably in Latin. But he may have noticed the odd difference between the word in a Latin Bible and a Greek Bible. Francisco may have lectured about it in his classes because his students were so upset they reported him to the Spanish Inquisition, the religious police at that time, who then restricted the distribution of Francisco's books and eventually put him under house arrest. Well, what was his horrendous crime? Well, among other things, Francisco may have suggested that the word in was possibly an incorrect translation in Luke 2:7. Well, what's the big deal? To find out, let's do a little Bible detective work. You ready? To start with, does Luke mention an inn anywhere else in his gospel? Can you think of anywhere? Did you think about the parable of the Good Samaritan in Luke chapter 10? Oh yeah, that's right. The Good Samaritan takes the injured man he found on the roadside to an inn. And here's the odd thing. The Greek word for inn in the Good Samaritan parable that Luke uses is pandahan, a normal, regular word for inn in Greek. But the word in Luke 2:7 that Luke uses is a different word. It is kataliuma. So kataliuma must be a synonym for pandahan, right? Not exactly. Luke uses the word kataliuma one other place in his gospel. In Luke chapter 22, it says, Jesus sent Peter and John, saying, "Go and make preparation for us to eat the Passover." Well, where do you want us to prepare for it? They asked. He replied, "As you enter the city, a man carrying a jar of water will meet you. follow him to the house that he enters and say to the owner of the house, "The teacher asks, where is the guest room where I may eat the Passover with my disciples?" He will show you a large room upstairs, all furnished. Make preparations there. Well, I didn't see anything about an inn in there. What word is kataliama translated? It's in verse 11. Where is the guest room where I may eat the Passover with my disciples? That doesn't seem to make sense. The upper room where Jesus and his disciples celebrated his Last Supper is not an inn. It's an upper room in a house. And pointing this out may be one of the things that got Professor Francisco Sanchez in trouble. And Bible scholars have been arguing about this ever since. What's going on? Since we are Bible detectives, let's take a look at what archaeologists and scholars of ancient literature can tell us about ordinary people's houses in small villages in 1st century CE Judea. From the literary sources and archaeological excavations, one finds that most houses had at least 2 stories, sometimes even 3. The upper floors were not always full stories. Sometimes they consisted of single rooms on a roof or an attic with its entrance from a ladder inside the house. These attics could be used for a member of the household or as a guest room. Some just had one large main room where most of the family lived and slept, and near the entrance at one end of the room was an area that was set lower than the elevated floor of the rest of the house. At night, animals would be brought into the lower portion of this room and would feed out of mangers that were either set into the walls or in the edge of the raised floor. And look, there's a room upstairs, a kataliama. Well, how can this mix-up happen? It probably goes back to translations of the Bible from Greek into other languages. As Christianity spread in the Roman Empire and Latin replaced Greek as the common language of those churches, a variety of Latin Bible translations emerged, starting in the 2nd century CE. And the word most likely used in Latin translations for kataliama was a Latin word hospitium, which means inn, place for strangers to stay. So the inn and manger in a stable idea kind of caught on, especially after St. Francis of Assisi performed a midnight mass in Italy on Christmas Eve 1223 in front of a life-size nativity scene with a crib and live animals, which scholars believe may have been the first nativity play. Here's an artist's idea of what it might have looked like. And as time goes on, more and more artists paint pictures and authors create stories about Jesus' birth in a stable. And as you might suspect, publishers of Bibles have been very reluctant to change the word inn to guest room in their Bibles. Tradition, right? But that reluctance has started to change slightly. The New International Version of the Bible, published in 2011, now says guest room, not inn. And so does the New Revised Standard Updated Version, published in 2021. If you get a brand new Bible as a present someday and it says guest room in Luke chapter 2, verse 7, now you know why. So what do you think? Inn, therefore stable and manger, or guest room? Remember, there's a manger in both versions, right? So what happens next? It's Christmas Eve next Sunday, and we're going to check out what Luke says about those pesky angels. Look for Bible Shorts, episode 97. Hark the herald angels sing.